Good morning. Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee and Chat with Hallee Bridgeman. I'm coming to you from my home office in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I have my cup of coffee. So I hope you have your cup of coffee or tea or whatever you drink in the morning, and you have a few minutes to sit back and relax while we chat about my books. Today's question that I'm answering from a reader is, why did I choose to self-publish versus traditionally publish? And for those of you who don't know, my books are self-published, which means that I pay the cover artist, I pay the editors. I have a couple of different editors. My husband is the formatter and the editor-in-chief of our publishing company. And so basically, we are the publisher. And so the question, why did we choose to do that, is actually my writing testimony. So I will share with you my writing testimony. So when I was 27, I woke up from a dream and started writing. And I had never imagined that I would write before, and I had never tried to write before, and I never dreamed that I would write. But for some reason, I woke up from this dream and just started writing. And 6 weeks later, what the result was what I now have published as A Melody for James. And I put it away because this was before really the internet. And if there was some internet, this was 1999, but I didn't have it. And I had no way of knowing what to do with it. I didn't know how to get published. I didn't know what to do. And so what I did was researched how to get published at Harlequin. And because that's what I read was romance novels. And so I wanted to write what I read. And I read all the time. And so I thought, well, this is what I'll write. And so I looked up the suspense. And I don't remember what the line was, but it was suspense. And I read all of the guidelines and I said, okay. And so the next book I wrote like using those guidelines as a checkbox. And what happened was the result was the book that I have now as an aria for Nick. And I submitted it to Harlequin, one of whatever branch it was. And I got back an acceptance saying, change this personality thing of Nick, and then we'll publish it. And I thought, no, I'm not going to change his personality. He's who I want him to be. And so I'll just keep writing and I'll quit trying to get published because I didn't want to change anything about my book. And so I think that in hindsight, that was God keeping me from becoming a publishing success, writing contemporary secular romances, basically. So the next couple of years, I wrote several more books, but I never did anything with them. Every one of them got put away, lid closed. I got divorced. I remarried my husband, Greg, and we had babies, and he deployed. And so here we are. He's in Afghanistan. I have Scott, who's 4. I had Kaylee, who was 11 or 12 or 13 or something. Scott, who was 4. Yeah, so Kaylee was 13. Scott was 4. Jeb was 2. And finally, the boys were starting to really sleep for the night because Scott, with autism, really had a hard time sleeping and truly slept the night good when he was about 6. But Jeb was fully weaned. He was potty trained. My husband says, now it's your job to get published. And so I pulled out all of my books. I dusted them off. And then on part of our lives, we had recommitted our lives to no longer be just Sunday Christians, to be going to church on Sunday, but then consuming the world. We wanted to reject the world. We wanted to not conform to the world. We wanted to be transformed by the Word of God. And so we intentionally cleaned out our media. We cleaned out our bookshelves. We did all of these things to clean what we consume so that it either glorified God or did not glorify evil. And those were our standards as we said about cleaning our media. But for some reason, when it came to my books, we didn't apply that to them. And I cleaned out my book. I opened up all these books and I looked at what I had, and I had A Melody for James and I had an aria for Nick, and those were suspense, but they were written before 9/11. So I had so much work to do to bring those up to date. They basically were gutted and completely rewritten. And so the Jewel series, where I had the first 3 written, were basically the most timeless books that I had. I threw in a few new cell phones and some technology, and that's it. And they were ready to go. And so I went ahead and submitted Sapphire Ice to a major publisher. And so the second I mailed it, I thought, what am I doing? This is a secular romance novel that the main character, Tony Viscoli, is motivated by greed, revenge, and his attraction to Robin is entirely based on lust. And then you have Robin, who was this broken woman who hated men and didn't trust them, but wanted to get to know what a sex life was like, and so she propositioned Tony, and he took her up on it. And that was my, and here I was, this Christian homemaking blogger who's blogging about all this, teaching my daughter purity and all this stuff, and I have this secular romance novel that was entirely of the world. And so I rewrote it. And I didn't change a lot of Robin's character, but I changed Tony, and I made him a man of God who's no longer motivated by greed, but by a love of serving God and love of serving people. And his attraction to Robin is now on a spiritual level instead of on a mostly lustful level. And instead of, getting her to submit to him, basically was what I originally written. It was, now I want to teach you how to love Jesus. And so that became the new book. And when I got the really thick envelope in the mail with, this beautiful stationery, I knew that Satan was going to tempt me with publishing this book. And it was basically an acceptance letter. We want this book. And I wrote them back and I said, I appreciate the fact that you want this book, but I have had a conviction and a change of heart. Can you please forward this new version to your inspirational division? And I was surprised that I didn't get some nasty letter or just being ignored back. Instead, I got another really amazing letter that was from an editor at this major publishing company in New York that said, I love this book, but I can't publish it. It's too risque for my readers, and to change the elements in the story to fit my readers, the whole story would have to be changed. And the letter said, I know I'll see this book on the shelf one day, but I know that I can't be the one to publish it. And so for rejections, that was really good. And so I found out later that what I had done is twice in my lifetime submitted a book, 2 separate books, and both times got an acceptance letter, which I had basically, beat the odds for most writers. And so I knew I could tell a good story. I knew that I could pay someone to edit my books. And this was in late 2011. And my husband and I, Greg, we went together. He was home from Afghanistan now. He was home full time. He had a job locally. And so we prayed about it together, and we decided that no major publisher was ever going to take my books at that time, because I was untested and unproved, and the way that I write my characters to be so realistic to the world and face conflicts that are realistic to readers in the world would also be pushing the limits of what those publishers could produce for their audience. And so, I don't write clean and sweet romances. What I get all the time in reviews and letters from people is, it's so refreshing to read such a realistic Christian character. Your characters face realistic situations, and those are the kind of books that I've been looking for, and on and on and on. And I think that that's kind of changed in publishing in the years since indie publishing and self-publishing has become popular, because it's given Christian readers so much more options than what these select publishers were willing to publish. And so I think that it's caused the market to shift a little bit. But at the time, I knew I would never be published by a publisher. And so through prayer, we discovered that what we needed to do was open Olivia Kimball Press. And so I published Sapphire Ice in March of 2012, Emerald Fire in April of 2012, and Topaz Heat in May of 2012. And that began the publishing career for me. I had no idea that I would become so very successful at writing and publishing, I think that Sapphire Ice, when I first published it, I probably sold like 20 copies, and now I've sold hundreds of thousands of copies. And it's been an amazing journey. And I have discovered an audience of readers that wouldn't ever have walked into a Christian bookstore to look for their next book. And that's been the amazing beauty of the type of publishing that I do, with ebooks mainly, and the type of advertising I've done. And I have so many readers who are not Christian fiction readers, but they love my books. And when I asked my readers, for my agent needed to know who to compare my books to, and so I put the survey out to my newsletter, which has thousands of subscribers, and I said, who would you compare my books to? And the resounding comeback were secular authors, which is interesting because they were the authors I read until I stopped reading those kind of books. And so clearly I've picked up a type of characterization and style from my favorite authors as I put together my own style. And so the reason that we went indie published, self-published, is because at the time that was how my books could be published without me compromising what I felt like the Holy Spirit was saying to write. So I can have characters that have the kind of moral dilemmas that we face in the real world that might make some readers who typically read things that are very sweet and very safe a little uncomfortable to read. And I can also bring in readers who normally wouldn't read the kind of message that I deliver, but who want to read my books. And so I went to a book signing with a friend of mine who writes secular romances that are almost on an erotic level. I don't read them, but I'm friends with her. And so she invited me and several other author friends to come and do this book signing with her. And so I had a table, and one of her fans won my basket of books. And I got a message from her and a review not long after that said, "This is one of the best books I have ever read. I thought I could skip the God parts, but they were so interwoven in the story that I couldn't help myself but read them. And it's such a good book." And she now has a new #1 fan. And I thought, that wouldn't have happened if I had just done it this traditional Christian publishing way. If I hadn't done what I did. And if nothing else, if she's the only person who ever read my books, then I would know that I had done something good in the sight of God. And so I'm happy that we did it this way. What happened is we ended up publishing several authors. My husband is the editor-in-chief of Olivia Kimball Press, and he goes to conferences and takes pitches and, signs. We have contracts signed with other authors. And it's this wonderful thing to be able to take authors' books and publish them if they are something that glorifies God, that has a Christian message and a Christian worldview. And we love that this is the route that God took us on. And we've been able to, bless so many thousands and thousands of readers with it. So I hope that answered your question, and I thank you for your question. And I hope you have a wonderful week. If you have a question for me, never hesitate to ask. You can click the little picture of the coffee cup on the sidebar of my newsletter, on the sidebar of my website, and it will take you to a Google form that you can ask me a question, or the link is also in my newsletter. And I can't wait to get to your questions, and I will see you next Monday. God bless you.